Well, welcome to Manchester, and this conference has begun, but it's been overshadowed by Boris Johnson and his potential leadership ambitions. Nobody's unsackable, warned the Chancellor this morning, as the party tried to drag attention back to the policies and their efforts to win over young voters. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is with me now. Gary, how would you characterise the atmosphere here?
I think an awful lot of activists that I've met are in shock still from the general election, haven't quite processed it, haven't quite absorbed it, aren't sure what to take away from all of that. I think one of my other impressions is quite often, not always, but sometimes when you look around and you see Theresa May pass by, there's normally an aura around a leader or prime minister at a conference like this. But I've watched quite a few occasions when people sort of look over, spot her there, and then carry on the conversation they were having. And it's very striking that. I think what a lot of the activists are looking for is answers to the question, what on earth happened there with the election? Well, part of the answer is to do with Theresa May, so that's part of the reason they're probably not in awe of her the way they might be. And they're also looking for messages. What is it that they can take to the Labour Party to make sure that they try to push them back from the gates? And there Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, was trying to help today. He was giving them some messaging, a history lesson, he said, calling the Labour leaders dinosaurs and saying that they'd turned Britain into Venezuela. I don't think even he would say that he was making it clear what the offer is to voters, to pull back voters that have been lost to the Tory party. Here's how the day went here. The tensions of the general election are still being worked through here. Some are still in shock about how the country voted. Are you a party member yourself?
Oh, hello.
Hello. Are you a party member yourself?
Yes, sir, I am.
Do you think the party is still in a bit of shock from that election result?
I think we are. Had you asked me about 3 months ago, you would have probably found me at the bottom of a whiskey bottle. Having said that...
and now I just find you having a stress-busting massage.
Well, hey, you know, you got to take him where you can get him, you know.
I do feel that there is more to be done, especially for the younger voters like myself, who have seemed to have left the Tory party.
Here we go. But the government is in the middle of an epic struggle over Brexit. Just at the moment, it's trying to work out how to take on Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. The Foreign Secretary will speak tomorrow with allies today through their support behind his red lines on Brexit, delivered at the weekend.
Right. If the European Union is still messing around by Christmas and they have not started serious discussions on reciprocal free trade based on recognition of conformity of standards, we give notice on the 1st of January that we will be moving to WTO rules.
That's the kind of talk of a walkout from Brexit talks the Chancellor believes is reckless and typical of the breezy approach of Brexit supporters like Boris Johnson.
We must not downplay the difficulties nor underestimate the complexities. This will be one of the most challenging tasks ever undertaken by a peacetime government in this country. But the Chancellor delivered what he said was a history lesson for people too young to remember the 1970s, an era, he said, of failed economic policy that Labour would repeat. Last week at Brighton, the dinosaurs had broken out of their glass cases, their political DNA apparently uncontaminated by any contact with the reality of 30 years of global economic development, a sort of political version of Jurassic Park. Thank you. There was polite applause that didn't quite see him off the stage. At last year's Tory conference, she praised the role of the state. This year, her team is trying to work out the right message on the economy for her big speech on Wednesday.
Do you think you'll actually stay for that speech?
I've actually got a business meeting in London.
Do you think a lot of people will stay? Doesn't seem to be the same electricity around Theresa May when she walks around.
No, and I think that's it. I saw yesterday Ruth Davidson being mobbed for selfies by lots of young people and lots of middle-aged people and lots of old people.
And you don't see that happening with the leader?
No.
It's a bit quiet, isn't it? Where is everyone?
It's not quiet. There are more...
I was at Labour last week. This is quiet.
Well, there are more young people here than I've seen in a long time. It's the best organised conference I've been to in getting in and out, and there's far more seating than there normally is. It's much better.
A lot of it empty.
There are quite a few fringe events, there's
loads going on at the moment.
Her team has finally been allowed to see what Boris Johnson intends to say tomorrow.
This is no ordinary conference.
I've been coming for 44 years. This, by a big margin, is the most extraordinary conference I've ever attended. There's a complete breakdown of collective responsibility, even at the top level of the cabinet. And the party is now absolutely obsessed with internal issues at a time of great economic peril for the country. I think voters may draw their own conclusions.
Outside protesters waded in on one pro-Brexit fringe meeting.
Ladies and gentlemen, engage and discuss. If your ideas are good, put them forward.
But the big internal Tory debate on how close Britain should be to the EU after Brexit, after the transition, is rumbling and could make these scenes look quite peaceful.
Hello, you don't agree.
Gary Gibbon. Well, with me now is the Secretary of State for Transport, Chris Grayling. Chris Grayling, practically all the cabinet ministers today have said that Boris Johnson is unsackable. So why hasn't he been sacked?
Well, I think nobody is unsackable, but nobody is actually at this conference about anything else except, first of all, saying we're going to get, we all want to get, Boris, myself, the whole cabinet, the best possible deal for Britain through the Brexit negotiations. But also this week, we're focusing on the domestic agenda, how we're looking to change the country for the better, and also setting out some of the things we've already done. So this is a business-like conference that is really designed to set out for the country and to rally the troops of our party behind what a very clear mission to carry on the work we've done already and to deliver the slogan of the conference, a country that works for everyone.
But there was also a design leading up to this conference, a very important design, rooted in Florence. The Prime Minister laid out her conditions and what she was going to do. And then almost immediately in the Sun newspaper, you get Boris Johnson setting out 4 principles which clash with the Prime Minister.
Well, what we set out at the Florence speech, what
why
she set out
sacked?
was
I mean, he's broken with her edict.
But what she did at the Florence speech was to say to the European Union, to our European partners, look, we want to reach an agreement. We think it's beneficial to all of us to reach an agreement. We're setting out some of the things we believe should be part of that agreement. But now we've got to go through a negotiation process to identify a way forward and a final structure of deal that works for both sides, for the European Union and for ourselves.
His big issue is what happens in this so-called transitional period of possibly 2 years, during which he is not prepared to accept that the ECJ, the European Court of Justice, will have any remit at all to look after what we're doing.
Look, these are complex issues.
Yeah, but
the first thing to say,
she said no. We're going to accept that. He said yes. This is unacceptable.
So if you look at that period of time, the first thing to say is that we leave the European Union in 2019, in March 2019. Beyond that, it is what we negotiate as a route to get into what I trust and believe will be a long-term trading partnership and a partnership in other areas like security.
Right.
Now, of course, there are going to be areas where European law applies. If you're a British business doing business in the European Union...
So it's not a red line for you, but it is for Boris Johnson.
Well, going forward, I mean, a part of any trade agreement is an acceptance of the regulations that will apply to both sides when they do with business in each other's countries. And, you know, if you're selling a product in the European Union after 2019, there will be European Union laws that you have to conform to, in the same way there are if we sell in the United States through United States laws, or Japan, there are Japanese laws.
Nevertheless, even you can see this is disunity, and it is, you have actually got Jacob Rees-Mogg supporting Mr. Johnson, and there is clearly a disagreement and a refusal of the leadership to deal with it.
Well, there are a lot of people who are part of the Leave campaign who feel passionately about it, but the thing that unites all of us, Jacob, myself, Boris, the Prime Minister, is we want the best possible arrangement, the best possible deal post-Brexit. We want a strong, forward-looking, dynamic, independent Britain, but we want to be good friends and neighbours and carry on trading with each other.
Let me ask you this. I've been to a number of fringes today about Brexiteers, almost exclusively Brexiteers. And the sense you get is that there's a bit of paranoia about that this thing could be slipping away. Do you get any sense that this might just be beginning to turn, that people are just a bit worried about it and big business and other people are beginning to win the day?
No, I don't. I mean, the position win is very straightforward. We have passed the decision through Parliament to trigger Article 50.
So you've never heard anybody express any anxiety that the thing might be just a little bit dicky?
Well, there are people who voted for Remain, who campaigned for Remain, who would still like us to remain.
Oh, no. I'm talking about these big meetings with Jacob Rees-Mogg and the rest, in which people are expressing anxiety that this is happening.
Well, we've got to make Brexit work, but we are leaving. We've triggered Article 50. Overwhelmingly, we're treating Article 50. And there's some good news stories around. You know, last year, even after the referendum, we attracted more international investment into the UK than ever before. We've seen some really big business investments in this country since the referendum. I'm very optimistic for our future. Yes, of course, it's a difficult process.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, if you are so confident, if you are so confident, do you want Mrs. May to stand again and be the Prime Minister the next time round?
Look, I want Theresa May to remain our leader for the foreseeable future.
How long is foreseeable?
Well, yeah, she can, I'm sure, and there's every opportunity for her to succeed, deliver a great Brexit.
Foreseeable future is a very loose term. It could be tomorrow. We can foresee tomorrow. Can we foresee 2 years' time?
It will be for Theresa, as it is for all Prime Ministers, to decide how long they serve. I see no reason why she cannot lead us for a long time to come, including through the next election.
You support her in that?
Well, yeah, there is no reason why. We will go through a strong Brexit process. We've delivered the right result for Britain. We've demonstrated that we'll continue to make this a country that works for everyone. There is every reason why, having had that success, she can continue as our Prime Minister.
Our organisation at the last election, and perhaps before, had lost the high repute in which it once stood. We had not moved quite so rapidly as our opponents.
Now, that's not an analysis of the 2017 election, but how the Conservative Party chairman reacted to the shock defeat by a grey radical called William Gladstone back in 1885. The party held an emergency conference to work out what had gone wrong, and the chairman told them.
Especially was it felt that our organisation needed broadening and popularising. 130 years on, it's much the same. The party may officially have won in June, but this conference feels like another inquest. At a packed fringe meeting this lunchtime, MPs and agents exposed extraordinary failings in the Tory campaign.
We have de-skilled our local volunteers. Our associations no longer have the training, the skills and the people in place to do the very basics of what we used to do and take for granted. In much of the country, the Conservative Party as a campaigning force does not exist.
And a younger agent lamented that Labour had hammered the Conservatives digitally.
We were out-fought on social media, Facebook, Twitter, every other social media you can possibly imagine by the Labour Party. And for the first time ever, the keyboard warriors made a real difference in the election. And this is something we're starting to address. And if it's taken seriously, it'll be fine. If we don't take it seriously, then we are in serious danger of losing the next election.
Former party deputy chairman Robert Halfon suggests some radical reforms.
We need to have a look at fundamental rebranding, so I've suggested that we call ourselves the Conservative Workers' Party, because we're the party of the national living wage, the party of apprenticeships, the party of creating millions of jobs. And we need to change our symbol, get away from having a tree or a broccoli or whatever it is to a ladder of opportunity. We've got an escalator there from behind me from Stanley Baldwin's time.
Remarkably, it's many years since the Conservative conference actually voted on any policy. Members must be given more participation, says this seasoned campaigner.
If the party doesn't radically reform itself now, it's going to face oblivion at the next general election.
Oblivion?
Oblivion.
How many seats is oblivion?
It's going to be wiped out, because Labour has understood that democracy means membership and members having a say in the running of the party.
But to win back young people, polls suggest, they must reform and refocus policy too.
Well, interestingly, when you ask what issues they want senior politicians to speak more on, health and climate change and education were the top three. And from 18 to 28-year-olds, climate change was the #1 issue.
Just 3 months after their 1886 crisis conference, the Tories won an election and reigned for another 6 years. Bouncing back this time may not be so easy.
Michael Crick reporting, joining us now, Conservative MPs Antoinette Sandbat and Anna Soubry, and the editor of The Spectator, Fraser Nelson. Anna Soubry, Boris Johnson. There is clearly a unity in the cabinet that he is not unsackable, but he's not been sacked.
Well, he should be.
Why?
Because well, 2 reasons. First of all, as Foreign Secretary, being completely blunt and honest with you, I think largely he has been an embarrassment, and I don't think he has helped our country. And secondly, I think that if Theresa is to survive, and I want her to survive, then she has got to assert her authority.
You sent him a
and
text. Did he respond?
No, he didn't respond to my text. I'm quite not at all surprised, of course. I asked him to resign on Saturday evening. It's not particularly a secret. And I like Boris as a person, but I think he's behaved in a way that is just no longer tolerable. If she's to survive, then she needs to assert her authority. She needs people standing shoulder to shoulder, not behind her as Boris says he does. Because everybody thinks, yes, he may be behind her, but what's he got in his hand?
Let's leave it on that and ask you, is the Spectator calling for his head?
Of course not. I mean, he stands guilty of making the case for Brexit, making the case for conservatism. He has been making the case for very much recently because he thinks anytime he says anything, he gets accused of plotting. But right now, all we have is him talking about what he's supposed to be talking about, the foreign policy of the United Kingdom. So you're effectively saying he's a better leader than No, I'm just saying he's doing better foreign secretary than he was being a month ago when he wasn't saying a thing. We need to hear more from Boris. No. He does have a large constituency out there, I'm afraid to say. And I would never vote for him, but you know.
I'm going to have to come in here and help us all.
Well, I think the job of a foreign secretary is to roll the pitch for the Prime Minister and to effectively to come up with red lines that are not red lines that have been agreed in the Cabinet is not helpful. And I think he should do the honourable thing. And if he cannot deal with Cabinet collective responsibility, he ought to resign his post.
Well, now, you're an observer of these things. Do they speak for the party?
No, I don't think so. I mean, to lose the Foreign Secretary now, you don't want to give the impression of a government that's falling apart. And also,
but as you said yourself, he's not been much of a Foreign Secretary. He was as silent as the grave for 6 or 8 weeks.
I know, and now he's speaking up, and it's a vast improvement. No, and when people, that's the thing.
All Boris does is talk about Boris. This is all about
Boris. He spoke about Europe in ways you disapproved of, but he was still talking about Europe.
He consistently undermines what the Prime Minister says.
It's pretty difficult. It's a kind of example of him actually undermining her. But when politicians talk, they might not always agree letter by letter, but it doesn't mean to say...
Excuse me, he is a member of the Cabinet. He knew what she was going to say in her Florence speech. He wrote a piece for the Daily Telegraph, 4,000 words, deliberately to undermine her. She gives her speech in Florence, and what does he do this weekend? He comes out with his red lines. Do forgive me, people are not interested in Boris Johnson's red lines. They want us to get on and govern. We are paid to govern. Let's get on with it. Let's support Theresa in the job she's doing. Stand shoulder to shoulder or roll the pitch, as Antoinette rightly says. He's a troublemaker, and it's all about Boris, and people are fed up with it.
Right.
Not just in the party, but out in the real world
Let's
as well.
park Boris for the moment, although he's unparkable. And ask you, Antoinette, what does the party have to do? I mean, the atmosphere here is, let's face it, damp. People have still got tears drying on their cheeks.
Well, I've had a really positive atmosphere. I've been out on some fringes and we've been talking about the industrial revolution, the digital age.
So they've got over the awful mess up of calling an election that wasn't needed.
That wasn't mentioned once in the fringe that I was at, and actually I think there are some really exciting policy ideas that are out there.
Exciting enough to lure young people?
I think so, but I definitely think we need to go out and make the case, and we need to go into primary schools, we need to go into secondary schools, and we need to make the case for conservatism now.
Fraser, you're a young person.
I was once, but I tell you, there is not much really to excite young people or even older people. Right? The problem with the Conservative offering is that it isn't very exciting. All the Tory party said at the last election was, look at Jeremy Corbyn, isn't he awful? It turns out that was not really enough to win a majority.
OK, well, so excite us, Anna Soubry.
Oh, don't get me going. I mean, I agree with you, and there is so much to be done, whether it's in the NHS, whether it's looking, of course, at business, and also, of course, on housing, and how we can build the houses that we desperately need. There's so much to be done, and actually there's a huge wealth of talent in the Conservative Party that can deliver that. Now, Theresa now needs to do is have a good reshuffle, bring on the brilliant new talent, we see some of it here this evening, regenerate her government and strengthen her position.